Hello guys, welcome back. It's Masha. Today I'm making mushroom bourguignon, which is one of my favorite things to make on a cozy fall or winter day or evening. It always makes me feel a bit like Julia Child when I'm cooking it. Fills the house with the most amazing savory scents, and it's made mostly with really common pantry and crisper ingredients. But the flavor is so much greater than the sum of its parts. And since this dish is made with very simple ingredients, the quality of every ingredient really counts, which is why I really recommend making your own mushroom miso broth for the soup. You can use store-bought vegetable broth and the dish will still be really delicious, but the broth is the real flavor backbone of this dish, and making your own really takes the flavor over the top. Making your own broth is really easy. It's nothing more than throwing a bunch of ingredients in a pot with water and letting it simmer away while you do other stuff. So I already made my broth yesterday, and what I did was I combined a leek, the whole leek, the green tops and the white part, with a carrot, an onion with the skin on, garlic, celery, some dried mushrooms, and also some shiitake stems because I'll be using shiitake mushrooms for the bourguignon. So I removed the stems and used them in the broth. If you ever have shiitake stems, they're awesome for flavoring broths. I also really like to add a few dates when I'm making veggie broth, which is a tip that I learned years ago, and they just add a little more dimension, a little sweetness. I salted everything really well, brought it to a simmer, and let it simmer for about an hour. I put some miso in a small bowl and ladled a little bit of the broth over and mixed the miso in. And then I returned that mixture back to the pot with the broth. And that's it, the mushroom miso broth is done. And it's so delicious and perfect for this bourguignon. So first we're gonna prepare the mushrooms. Today I'm using a mixture of cremini mushrooms, shiitake mushrooms, and maitake mushrooms. You absolutely don't have to use this much of a variety. You can just use one type of mushrooms. Cremini are a really solid choice for this dish, or you can even use regular white button mushrooms. I just like using a variety because I think it's really fun. So to prep the mushrooms, I'm gonna start with the maitake, which are also called hen of the woods. And for this shape, I think it's really fun to just tear them and have these irregular, scraggly bits. So I'm basically just tearing it off the root end because this part is kind of tough, so I'm not gonna use it. But everything else I'm just tearing off. And then I'm just gonna tear them into just smaller bite-sized pieces. For the shiitake, like I said earlier, I already separated the stems out and used them for my broth. And with the caps, I'm also gonna tear them. Also just for textural interest. Just kind of bite-sized pieces. And then keep in mind that mushrooms really shrink a lot when they're cooked, so the pieces don't have to be too small. And then I'm gonna slice the cremini. So that way we'll have kind of a mixture of irregular pieces and more regular pieces with the cremini. But you could also tear them if you prefer. So I'm just gonna slice them up. And I usually keep the stem or the leg on unless it looks really brown and like it's about to go, then I remove it. But otherwise I just keep it on. And as far as washing mushrooms, there are a lot of differing opinions on how to clean them. What I usually do is I kind of assess how much, dirt there is on my mushrooms. And if there isn't much, I'll just brush it off with a brush, a mushroom brush, which is a recent discovery, and it works super well, or even like a wet paper towel works well for that. If the mushrooms are really looking like they just came out of the ground, I'm not afraid to rinse them super quickly. Just the basic idea is that you just don't want to drench the mushrooms in water because they do take on the water really quickly. But otherwise, if you rinse them super quickly and then dry them off right away, I think it's not an issue to wash the mushrooms. Some people even like to wash them and put them in a salad spinner, which really dries them out apparently. I don't have a salad spinner, so I can't tell you for sure. Alright, so the mushrooms are ready. I'm gonna set them aside for now. And I'm gonna prep the rest of the ingredients. So we've got pearl onions, which are the really fun old school ingredient in bourguignon. We don't need to do anything to them, they're just going in whole. We need to dice up a yellow onion. Another thing that I love about this recipe is that it offers a really great lesson in building really rich and savory flavors with plant-based ingredients. It takes a little more effort than when cooking with meat, but it's entirely possible to make a super savory, rich dish with just plants. So the onion is diced. Next we've got carrots. So for these guys, I like to cut them into half moons, in half lengthwise and then crosswise. Whew, crying from the onion. Next I'm gonna mince some garlic. So I smashed them first. And that makes the skin come off really easily. And mince. And we're ready to start cooking. Okay, so I let my pot heat up over medium heat. Now I'm gonna add some olive oil, plenty, just to generously coat the bottom of the pan. And we're gonna start by cooking the mushrooms. I really like to give mushrooms alone time in the pot because it allows them to brown properly and there's no other ingredients messing with them or steaming them or anything like that. So the oil is nice and hot. I can see it's shimmering and I'm gonna add the mushrooms. Gonna add a pinch of salt, generous. Gonna stir to coat the mushrooms in the oil and salt. And then once the mushrooms are nice and coated, we want to kind of get them into an even layer. And then we're just gonna leave them undisturbed. And what this is gonna do is it's gonna allow the mushrooms to brown properly. They're gonna release a ton of liquid, specifically the cremini. They usually release a lot of water, and by leaving the mushrooms alone, we're just gonna allow that liquid to evaporate and for the mushrooms to brown, as opposed to stirring them all the time, which will just make the mushrooms steam instead of browning. So I'm leaving these alone for a good 10 minutes, maybe even 15 minutes. Large volumes of mushrooms sometimes take longer, and you'll see as the time passes, they will reduce in volume because they're going to release their liquid, and you'll see that liquid bubbling away. And what we basically want to see before we stir them is for most of that water to evaporate. Okay, so it's been about 10 minutes and the mushrooms have reduced in volume so much. So at this point, I'm going to add some freshly ground black pepper and I'm going to finally stir them. So I haven't stirred them at all up to this point. And what you should see is that the undersides got nice and browned. And now I'm just gonna let them cook for a few more minutes just to let the other sides brown and to really get all that liquid out of here. And then they'll be done. Alright, so I let the mushrooms go for another few minutes and at this point they're done. So I'm gonna remove them from the pot and transfer them to a bowl, and then we're gonna return them back after we give our veggies a head start. So the mushrooms are out of the pot. I'm gonna add more olive oil, coat the bottom, and I'm gonna add the cipollini onions. And basically what we wanna do is let these guys brown first, kind of get them nice and flat in here, and leave them undisturbed like this for a few minutes so that the underside's brown, and then we'll flip them and let the other side brown, and then we'll add the rest of the veggies. All right, so I'm flipping the onions over. The undersides got nice and brown. And browning ingredients like this is just another step in flavor building. So browning equals flavor. For dishes like this that are supposed to be just bursting with rich, savory flavors, it's great to take extra steps like these and brown your ingredients first, brown your mushrooms first, brown the pearl onions, because it's all gonna compound and create this amazing flavor. So the pearl onions are good to go, so we're gonna add the regular onion and carrot. I'm also gonna add some thyme and smoked paprika. And again, smoked paprika is not a traditional ingredient. in Bourguignon at all, but it has amazing smoky flavor, which when you add just a tiny bit of it really helps to build an overall savory type of vibe. And then some tomato paste, which is another great umami flavor building ingredient. I'm gonna mix this all in, and we're gonna let this cook until the onions and carrots are nice and soft. And I forgot to say to add another generous pinch of salt, because we want to salt in layers. Okay, so our veggies are nice and soft. Next, I'm gonna add the garlic. And the reason that we don't add the garlic with everything else is because it cooks much faster than onions and carrots, and basically we just don't want to risk it burning and becoming bitter. So stir that in just until it's nice and fragrant. Now I'm gonna add the mushrooms back to the pot. Stir them in to really incorporate. Next we're gonna add red wine. Bring it up to a simmer and let it reduce for about 5 minutes. And at this point, your house is gonna start smelling outrageously good. And what you're looking for with the wine is you wanna see it mostly reduced until it's kind of glossy and syrupy. And once you see that, you're ready to keep going. So now I'm gonna add the mushroom miso broth. Just enough to have a chunky stew consistency. I'm gonna add some bay leaves and another generous pinch of salt just to season everything through. And now we're gonna bring this to a simmer. And then once you've established a nice simmer on your bourguignon, you wanna cover it and let it go for a good hour. We really want for all the flavors to mingle and develop in there. If at any point it looks like it's starting to get too thick, add a little bit more broth, just to whatever stew consistency you prefer. But otherwise, just let it do its thing, and in an hour, it's gonna be really, really amazing. And at this point, I always take the opportunity to clean up, but also to make mashed potatoes, because I think that the bourguignon tastes the best with mashed potatoes. So definitely make those. I don't really do anything special for mashed potatoes. I just boil my potatoes. I mash them, I add a little splash of plant milk, a little bit of olive oil, salt, and pepper, and that's it. Okay, so it's been a whole hour and the house smells like the best place on earth. God, looks so good. I'm gonna discard the bay leaves. So our next and last step is I have a little bit of flour in this little bowl. I'm using spelt flour. You can use all-purpose flour or whole wheat flour, doesn't really matter. And I'm going to just ladle a little bit of the broth from the pot over the flour, just a tiny bit. And then I'm gonna use a whisk to whisk it in and make a slurry. And then I'm gonna add this slurry back to the pot and stir it in and let this cook for another 5 minutes, and that slurry is just gonna thicken up the stew a little bit. Alright, so it's been 5 minutes and the slurry has thickened up the stew ever so slightly, and we're done. It's time to serve. So we'll do the mashed potatoes first, followed by the bourguignon. I'm gonna garnish with some parsley. And we're done. Give it a quick taste. This is like peak plant-based savory flavor. So, so good. I'll put the link to this recipe in the description box below if you'd like to try it. It's so great for a slow, cozy weekend or for special occasions like holidays. Thanksgiving is coming up in the US. I think this would be an amazing dish to serve on Thanksgiving or even Valentine's Day, things like that. So I hope that you'll give this a try. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.